She said the door was unlocked, but it wasn't the door I was afraid to walk through, it was everything waiting on the other side. The neighborhood was calm that spring, birds tracing lazy arcs through the blue sky, the faint hum of sprinklers in the distance, sunlight washing over neat driveways. He'd only been living there for a few weeks, still learning the rhythm of the place. Every morning, the same soft ritual played out, coffee in hand, he'd stand by his window and see her. The woman next door, 42 years old, American Latina, with long black hair, lightly tanned skin, and dark brown eyes that caught sunlight like a secret. She always moved with quiet grace, watering her garden, adjusting the folds of her dress, tucking a loose strand of hair behind her ear. Her presence seemed peaceful, but there was something distant in her expression, a faint melancholy beneath the calm. She was married, that much was obvious from the ring glinting on her finger, but her husband was rarely around. The man noticed that. The way she looked toward the street every evening as if expecting a car that never came. The way her shoulders softened once she realized it wouldn't. They hadn't spoken much beyond polite greetings. Just small exchanges, good morning, beautiful day, your roses look incredible. Yet every brief moment left an imprint. Her voice carried warmth, low and steady, like someone who had once been full of laughter but now measured every word before letting it go. Sometimes, she'd wave across the fence, smiling with her eyes more than her lips. Other times, she'd look lost in thought, her hand absently tracing the petals of a flower. He could never tell what weighed on her, only that it was something she carried quietly, gracefully. He tried not to think about her too much. She was his neighbor, after all, and a married woman. But she had a presence that lingered, something that slipped into his mind during quiet evenings. Maybe it was the loneliness he sensed, not loud or desperate, but something soft and human. Something that mirrored his own. One morning, as he locked his front door, he caught sight of her struggling with a garden hose that had knotted itself. Her laugh, small and self-conscious, floated through the air. She looked up, catching his gaze, and for a moment time seemed to still. "Morning," she said, her tone gentle, warm enough to melt through the distance. He nodded, managing a smile. "Morning." It was nothing, a simple exchange, yet the way her eyes softened made it feel like the beginning of something. Not a story, not yet, but a spark of recognition. Two lonely souls quietly aware of each other in the calm rhythm of suburban life. As he walked to his car, he felt her gaze on him for a brief second longer than politeness required. It left a quiet echo, one he couldn't quite explain, but couldn't ignore either. Something had shifted. Subtly. Silently. And he didn't know it yet, but that was the first time he'd felt her world open, just slightly, like a door left unlocked that it began simply, the kind of moment that could have easily passed without meaning, yet somehow didn't. It was late afternoon, sunlight bright but soft, spilling across the quiet street. He was sweeping his front steps when he heard her voice call out, low, melodic, with that trace of laughter she tried to hide. "Hey, could you give me a hand for a second?" She stood in her front yard, struggling with a garden hose that had twisted itself into a tight knot. The 42-year-old American Latina woman, with long black hair and lightly tanned skin, wore a sleeveless linen blouse and faded blue jeans, a few curls escaping around her face in the warm breeze. Her tone was casual, but there was something disarming in the way she said it, like she already knew he'd say yes. He crossed the short space between their yards. "Sure. Looks like it's winning the fight," he joked, taking the hose from her hands. Her laugh was soft, brief, but it filled the air between them. "It's been one of those days," she said, tucking a strand of hair behind her ear. "I thought I could fix it myself, but, well, apparently not." He smiled, crouching down to untangle it. As he worked, she knelt beside him, her perfume faint but warm, something floral, familiar, comforting. Their shoulders brushed once, lightly, accidentally, but neither pulled away. "Thanks," she said after a pause, voice quieter now. "You're good with your hands." He looked up. Her eyes held his for a moment longer than expected, dark brown, flecked with gold where the sunlight hit. The words were innocent, but her tone carried something beneath the surface, something unspoken. "Guess I've had practice," he replied, trying to sound casual, though his pulse betrayed him. She smiled, slow and knowing, but not bold. "Just aware. That's a good quality. Not everyone bothers to help anymore." He shrugged, finishing the last knot. "Maybe people just forget how nice it feels to be needed." Her expression softened. For a second, the air seemed still again, her face close, her hand resting lightly on the garden fence beside his. He could hear the quiet rhythm of her breathing, the faint creak of the wooden boards beneath them. When the hose finally loosened, she exhaled with relief. "You've saved me," she said playfully, standing up and wiping her palms on her jeans. "Glad I could help," he replied, standing too. As he handed the hose back, their fingers brushed. Just a fraction of a second, skin against skin, but it felt longer. Her gaze flickered to his hand, then to his eyes. For an instant, something passed between them that words couldn't capture. She broke the silence with a small smile. "Well, I owe you one." He chuckled, unsure what to do with the energy buzzing through him. "I'll hold you to that." She turned toward her porch, sunlight catching in her hair, and said softly, almost teasingly, but with warmth that lingered, "Maybe you should." He stood there for a long moment after she disappeared inside, the faint scent of her perfume still in the air. That day, he realized it wasn't the hose that had come undone, it was the careful distance between them. The next few days settled into a rhythm neither of them planned, but both quietly welcomed. It started with simple things, a wave across the driveway, a shared smile when they passed each other near the mailbox. But every time their eyes met, the air carried a faint current of something neither dared to name. The 24-year-old man had never thought of himself as someone drawn to complication. Yet the 42-year-old American Latina woman next door, with her long black hair, lightly tanned skin, and graceful composure, had a way of making silence feel meaningful. She wasn't the kind of woman who sought attention, she carried herself with quiet certainty, like she had already lived through storms and learned to move gently afterward. It became normal for him to find excuses to cross paths, checking the mail a bit later in the day, watering his small patch of lawn when she was outside. Each time, she greeted him with that same soft voice, polite but warm. One morning, she surprised him. "Coffee?" she asked over the fence, holding up a second mug. He hesitated, just long enough for her to smile knowingly. "Don't worry," she said lightly, "it's just coffee." He joined her on her porch, bright, sunlit, filled with small pots of herbs and the faint smell of lavender. The world seemed slower there. She sat on the edge of the step, her knees drawn slightly toward him, the sunlight tracing lines of warmth over her shoulders. Her hair was tied loosely, a few strands brushing her cheek. "Do you always make coffee for the neighbors?" he asked, half teasing. "Only the polite ones," she said, her tone carrying that small laugh again, the one that made her eyes crinkle slightly at the corners. They talked about little things at first, her garden, his new job, the way the neighborhood seemed to exist in its own sleepy rhythm. But as time passed, the space between words grew smaller, their silences more comfortable. At one point, she reached to adjust the collar of his shirt, a stray thread hanging loose. Her fingers brushed against his neck, quick and natural, but the contact sent a jolt through him. She froze for a second, realizing the intimacy of it, then smiled faintly, withdrawing her hand. "Sorry," she murmured. "Old habit." "It's okay," he said softly, though his heart was far from calm. He wanted to say something more, to tell her he noticed the way she looked out at the empty street at night, or how her laughter always carried a hint of restraint. But the words wouldn't come. Instead, he just sat there, listening to the sound of the breeze moving through her wind chime, the sunlight glinting off her wedding ring. The moment was quiet, unspoken, and perfect in its uncertainty. When he left, she walked him to the gate, her shoulder brushing his arm as she passed. Their eyes met again, just a glance, just long enough. That was how it began, not with declarations or promises, but with something softer, understanding. The kind that needs no words, only proximity. That evening, the neighborhood glowed under the golden wash of sunset. He was walking home, earbuds in, when he noticed her car parked slightly crooked in the driveway, the hood still warm, a grocery bag slumped on the curb. The front door was open, just a few inches, swaying gently in the breeze. He hesitated. Then her voice floated out, low, steady, but faintly amused. "You can come in, it's unlocked." He froze mid-step. The words were casual, yet something in their rhythm made his pulse quicken. He glanced around, quiet street, fading light, no one watching, then pushed the door open slowly. Inside, the 42-year-old Latina woman stood by the kitchen counter, unpacking a bag of groceries. The air smelled faintly of jasmine and roasted coffee beans. She turned to look at him over her shoulder, her black hair pulled into a loose bun, a few strands falling against her neck. "I didn't mean to startle you," she said, smiling slightly. "I just thought you might help me carry the rest from the car." He exhaled, half laughing. "You scared me for a second." You thought what?" she teased, one eyebrow lifting. He shook his head, unsure whether to laugh or apologize. But she was already moving past him, brushing his arm lightly as she handed him a second bag. The contact was brief but charged, like the echo of something neither could name. They worked together in the soft quiet of her kitchen, the rhythmic sound of groceries being unpacked, the muted hum of evening crickets outside. Every so often, she'd glance at him, her smile lingering a little too long, her tone a little too gentle. "You've been alone here a while, haven't you?" she asked suddenly. He nodded. "Since I moved in, yeah. Feels like everyone here's already settled." "Settled," she repeated, almost wistfully. "That's one word for it." He didn't know how to respond. But when she leaned back against the counter, looking at him with that mixture of warmth and distance, he could sense it, the quiet ache of someone who had learned to live with absence. She broke the silence with a small laugh. "I was about to open a bottle of wine." "Would that be inappropriate?" "Maybe," he said, smiling. "But I don't mind inappropriate." Her eyes flickered, surprise, amusement, maybe a hint of caution. Then she turned, opening the bottle with steady hands. "One glass," she said softly. "For conversation." The light from the window caught her skin, golden, soft, alive. They sat at the counter, close but not touching, the air between them filled with quiet tension and the slow rhythm of breath. When he finally stood to leave, she walked him to the door. Her hand rested lightly on the edge of it, her voice almost a whisper. "Next time," she said, her gaze steady on his, "you don't have to wait for an invitation." The words lingered even after he stepped outside, as though the unlocked door wasn't just about the house anymore, but something deeper, quietly waiting to be opened. The next few days passed in a strange blur, half anticipation, half restraint. He tried to act normal, mowing the lawn, walking to work, pretending not to notice the way her curtains would shift slightly when he passed her house. But each evening, as the sun dipped low and the streetlights flickered awake, his eyes would find that front porch, and that unlocked door. On Friday, the hum of summer air carried something else, piano notes. Soft, uneven, like someone rediscovering an old song. He followed the sound, heart thudding, until he stood once more before her door. It was open again, just enough to show the outline of her figure by the piano, the 42-year-old American Latina woman, in a cream blouse and jeans, her long black hair falling loosely around her shoulders. She looked up before he could speak. "You can come in," she said quietly, her tone softer than last time. "I was hoping you might." He stepped inside. The air was cooler, scented faintly of vanilla and rain, the kind of comfort only her home seemed to hold. The piano fell silent as she turned toward him, folding her arms. "You've been avoiding me," she said, not accusingly, but as a fact. He smiled faintly. I thought maybe that was safer. Her eyes held his for a long moment. And did it feel safer? He didn't answer. She sighed, brushing a strand of hair behind her ear. I know what people would think if they saw this. You, standing in my kitchen. Me, a married woman, he interrupted gently. Separated. Her lips curved, a half-smile that didn't reach her eyes. Still married enough to raise eyebrows. The air between them thickened with unspoken things, guilt, curiosity, longing, maybe all at once. He watched her turn away, her fingers lightly touching the piano keys, pressing one soft note. I wasn't supposed to get used to you, she said. But every time you walk past that window, I notice. Something inside him shifted, the realization that this connection, however fragile, wasn't imagined. He stepped closer, slow enough that she could stop him if she wanted. Then stop pretending you don't, he said quietly. Her breath caught, just slightly. She turned toward him, and for the first time, her composure cracked. The woman who always seemed calm, composed, untouchable, now looked simply tired. Human. You're too young to be tangled in someone else's regrets, she whispered. He shook his head. I'm old enough to know what I feel. For a moment, neither moved. The tension was soft but undeniable, not lust, but longing restrained by morality. Then she stepped back, shaking her head lightly. I can't, she said, though her voice trembled. Not yet. He nodded, not angry, just understanding. As he turned to leave, her voice followed him, barely audible. Just, don't stop coming by. He paused in the doorway, looking back. The piano glowed under the warm lamplight behind her, and in that moment, the distance between them felt like the most fragile thing in the world. The weekend brought rain, the kind that wrapped the neighborhood in gray softness, blurring rooftops and slowing time. From his window, he could see her house through the mist, lights glowing faintly through the curtains, warm against the cool drizzle. He tried to focus on his book, on the ordinary rhythm of the day, but his mind drifted back to her words, don't stop coming by. By late afternoon, thunder rolled low and steady across the sky. The streets shimmered with puddles, and instinct, or maybe longing, pulled him outside. He found himself standing at her porch again, droplets sliding from his hair, clothes clinging slightly to his skin. The door was closed this time, but before he could knock, it opened. There she stood, the 40-year-old American Latina woman, her long black hair damp and curling at the ends, wearing a soft gray sweater and fitted jeans. Her expression softened at the sight of him, surprise giving way to quiet warmth. You'll catch a cold, she said, voice laced with gentle concern. She reached out, brushing a raindrop from his cheek with the back of her hand. The touch was light, fleeting, but it grounded him more than anything else could. He smiled faintly. I didn't want you to think I stopped coming by. Something in her gaze shifted, pride, affection, and something deeper she tried to hide. She stepped aside. Come in. The house felt different tonight, cozy, the soft patter of rain against the windows filling the silence. The scent of cinnamon tea lingered in the air. She handed him a towel, then poured 2 cups, her movements calm but deliberate, as though she needed something to do with her hands. He watched her, every gesture slow and thoughtful. There was a grace to her even in stillness, the way she tucked her hair behind her ear, the faint crease between her brows when she was deep in thought. When she finally sat beside him on the couch, the space between them was narrow but electric. Neither spoke for a long while. Outside, thunder cracked again. The sound seemed to make her flinch, ever so slightly. Without thinking, he reached out, his hand resting lightly on hers. Her eyes met his, and in them, he saw the storm she was holding back. I used to hate storms, she said softly. But lately, they just feel honest. Like they don't hide what they're feeling. He nodded, thumb brushing gently against her knuckles. Maybe we could both learn from that. She smiled, small, fragile, but real. The kind that said I hear you, even if I can't say everything yet. The rain grew heavier, but neither moved. The warmth of her hand in his, the quiet hum of the world outside, it all felt suspended in a single heartbeat of understanding. She finally whispered, almost to herself, sometimes, the hardest thing isn't loving someone, it's believing you're allowed to. He didn't respond. He just stayed there, beside her, as the storm outside softened into a quiet drizzle, and for the first time, she didn't pull her hand away. By dawn, the storm had passed, leaving the world washed clean, the scent of wet earth, the glimmer of dew on her porch railing, and the soft hum of life beginning again. He woke early, restless, replaying every moment from the night before. The feel of her hand in his. The weight of her words. The silence that followed, not awkward, but full of something unspoken and alive. He walked toward her house as the sun began to rise, pale gold spilling through the thinning clouds. The neighborhood was quiet, the streets slick with light. When he reached her gate, the door was open again, not wide, just slightly ajar, like before. But this time, it didn't feel like an invitation born of accident. It felt deliberate. He stepped inside quietly. She stood by the kitchen window, back turned, her 40-year-old American Latina beauty framed by the gentle glow of morning. Her long black hair cascaded freely down her back, glinting in the light. She wore a loose white shirt, sleeves rolled to her elbows, and there was something peaceful about her, the calm after a storm that had lasted far too long. When she turned and saw him, a small smile curved her lips. "You came early." He shrugged, trying not to let the nerves show. "Couldn't sleep." She handed him a mug of coffee, the aroma warm and grounding. "Me neither." For a few minutes, they stood side by side at the counter, steam curling between them, their reflections faintly visible in the rain-speckled glass. "I've been thinking," she said finally. "About last night. About us." He set the mug down slowly. "And?" She exhaled, her fingers tracing the rim of her cup. "I spent so many years trying to do everything right, to be who everyone expected me to be. And in the process, I forgot what it meant to feel alive." Her voice trembled slightly on that last word. "You reminded me of that." He didn't speak, afraid to break the fragile honesty between them. Her eyes lifted to meet his. "But it can't stay like this, sneaking glances through windows, waiting for storms to bring us together. If this means something, it has to be real." He nodded slowly. "Then let it be." For a moment, time seemed to stop. She stepped closer, her hand lifting to rest gently against his cheek. The warmth of her touch carried everything she hadn't said: fear, gratitude, longing, courage. "You're too young to understand how heavy freedom can feel," she whispered, smiling faintly. He met her gaze steadily. "Then let me help you carry it." The silence that followed wasn't uncertain, it was full of quiet acceptance. She leaned in, resting her forehead against his chest, her voice barely a whisper. "Then maybe this time, I'll leave the door unlocked on purpose." Outside, the sun broke fully through the clouds, flooding the kitchen with golden light. The storm had gone, but its echo lingered, not in thunder or rain, but in two hearts learning what it meant to be seen, finally, without fear. And as he held her there, the air between them calm and bright, it no longer felt like a secret. It felt like a beginning.